Let's get started. So appreciate all the engagement so far in the chat. Couple things before we get started. You're going to have some questions. So the best way for us to see those is if you click the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. If you can put all of your questions in there, we'll try to get to as many as we can. Today we're going to talk about objection handling. I'm really excited. We got a couple guests today, as you can see. Dana Zimmerman. Dana is an outbound mid-market SDR at ZoomInfo. We have her manager, Ariel Bratton. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that correct. She's
Airly,
a sales
Bratton.
Airly. I'm messing up locations. I'm messing up names today. She's a sales development manager at ZoomInfo. And Jerry, we've done one of these before. He is a director of sales development and lead gen, excuse me, at Revenir. So good to have everyone. Let's dig in first. What I think would be really interesting to hear from the audience is, can you let us know in the chat when you're making cold calls, when you're sending cold emails, what objections are you getting right now? Drop them into the chat for us. What objections are you running across? What do you guys think? Any of this look abnormal to you, or is this kind of what you were expecting?
Very common. A lot of blocking objections.
Yeah, too expensive. Economy. Yeah. The reason why I like to do this in the chat is hopefully it makes you feel a little better if you're looking at the chat, and that most reps are they're getting the same types of objections. I want to talk about benchmarking first. So we're going to talk benchmarking. So basically, how to identify if you're having a problem with objections and where at what point in the call to fix it. We're going to talk about some mindset stuff, and then we'll probably spend over half the time just going through specific objections and how to handle them. I'd like to start, Jerry, with you. You want to explain a little bit more about what you guys do at Revenir and just give people a perspective on the volume of outreach that you guys are doing, and then you have a dashboard that you guys track that would be really great to start with.
For sure. Thanks, Jason. So yeah, here at Revenir, we design, build, and manage outbound sales development teams. All of our SDRs are here right outside of Boston and Lexington, Mass. We have about 150 SDRs and about 60 to 70 clients active. So these SDRs are dedicated to certain clients doing, SDR work. We're a phone first shop. We like to hit the phones, but we do omni-channel. So we use LinkedIn and email as well. But obviously, benchmarking your phone performance is important, and you do want some data backing that. So for us, we make over 100,000 dials per month as an organization. And we aggregate that data into Tableau to see kind of how the market is. And this was really interesting to see, once everybody went hybrid and remote, pivoting from direct to cell dials. And, we got to see the dashboard and see where the data lies. So I'm going to share out a dashboard that's going to go into connect rate. How we measure connect rate is when the ideal prospect picks up the phone. Conversation rate. So that is when a conversation with a live prospect goes 2 minutes or greater. Meeting scheduled rate. So of those conversations, how many go to a meeting scheduled, and delivered rate. With outbound prospects, a delivered rate, you're going to have some reschedules, you're going to have some stuff move around. So we also benchmark that. So let me share my screen really quickly to give you an idea of what to look for your internal team. So this is a Tableau dashboard. There is a lot of ups and downs, but really at the bottom is where you can see the aggregate. So you can see connect rate at 5.8%, conversation rate just below 30%, right below a third for meeting scheduled rate, and right around 80% for delivered rate. Now, keep in mind, this does go into a lot of different industries. On our floor, we do have a lot of SaaS companies, but we also have some energy companies, manufacturing companies. So this isn't a one size fits all, but at least for everybody on here, you can take a look at the connect rate, conversation rate, meetings scheduled, and delivered rate to give yourself an idea of where to start to look at to see if you're having where to improve, pretty much.
Okay, let's, I think what would be kind of interesting, I don't know if there's any data nerds out there, but when I see stuff like this, I get really excited because we can be really objective. Let's start with, okay, connect rate. I'll just kind of open this up to the entire panel here. 5% is what I've seen to be pretty common. If a rep has a low connect rate, like let's say 3%. What are some suggestions that you guys have to improve connect rates?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think the first thing that we need to consider is, is their phone number being marked as spam? Like when we're calling through dialers, that's the first thing that I ask, like, hey, have you called your cell phone? Have you called, your mom's cell phone if she has a different like cell phone provider? Because I know that AT&T is like uh,
Mhm.
the biggest like spam blocker number system in there. So that's one thing I check. I also want them to check like what time of day are you calling as well? Because that can also make a difference. But the first step would definitely be like, is that number coming up as spam? Because if you're not having connect rates and somebody sees spam on their on their cell phone, immediately going to decline. So that's a really good first step for reps to take.
Yeah, I can piggyback off Airly as well. When I set up my workflow and my days and my task, I will flip flop throughout the week. I'm calling at 8 a.m. I'm not catching them at that point. I'll try at the end of the day, the following day, or even the same day. I'll move them out until 4 o'clock. Because I find for myself in the morning at the end of the day is my best connection rate. I'm also a double tapper. I double tap.
Mm.
They'll pick up after that, wondering why I'm double tapping. And I straight tell them I want to talk to you. I don't answer either on their numbers. So I'm a
Yeah.
double
Yeah.
tapper.
Let us know in the chat, do you double tap? So a double tap is I call, they don't pick up, I don't leave a voicemail, I call them directly back. Let us know in the chat. And we're
Yes,
spending some time, by the way, on this because objection handling doesn't matter at all, and cold calling techniques don't matter if you can't get a prospect to pick up the phone.
exactly.
Yeah, so it looks like quite a
And
few to do.
sometimes people have it set where it's an unknown number, it goes directly to their voicemail. And I find if you double tap, it breaks that. So if you're getting a ring and the voicemail is picking right up, they're not necessarily sending you to voicemail. It's the way that they have their phone set up. And if you call right back, it gets through. So that's just a little trick to take
So
home with you too.
I got one more follow-up on that, Dana, for you, because the concern that people are going to have is, well, what if the prospect is annoyed? And I'm sure that
Absolutely.
happens to you. The prospect gets annoyed every now and then. In my
Yep.
experience, it's way less often than you would think. But how do you handle that if someone's like, "Well, why did you call me twice?" How do you respond to that?
I remember there was one guy, I actually called his office. Then I called his cell phone and I was like, I never left him a voicemail. And I was in the process of writing him an email. So I called him again and he answered. He's like, Dana, you just triple tapped me. I said, my intentions really were not to triple tap you, but I realized as I was writing the email, I never left you a voicemail because my process is I leave a voicemail, let the prospect know, hey, I'm going to shoot you an email as well. If it's easiest for you to get back to me via email, like that's perfectly fine. Feel free to give me a call. It's nice to chat as well. But I called back intentionally to leave the voicemail, not expecting him to pick up. But I said, I'm just being honest with you. I didn't leave you the voicemail. And I've also had people, ask or say, like, you literally just called me and double tapped. And I just am honest. I said, I'm going to be honest with you. Like, I personally don't answer calls I don't know. I wanted to talk to you. So I gave you a call back, hoping that you would pick up, and you did. So it's fantastic. And they
Really
appreciate the
confident.
honesty, you know? Just be honest, be human. And it loosens people up a little bit.
Yeah. I think if you can have your personality and the smile that you have there, you can hear that through the phone.
Oh,
And I
I
think that's a
always have it.
really,
Yeah.
really big part of it.
Yeah.
Jerry, what about you? Pickup rates, if you're looking at reps across the board and there's low pickup rates, anything else that wasn't mentioned so far that you guys look at Reveneer?
First thing I usually dive in is the dials. Who are they dialing? What is the quality of those phone numbers? You want to go after cell phones in this day and age. Typically, if it's available to you, you need to have a consistent connect rate because if you're not having at bats, you're not going to book many meetings. Something else, going through, and there is that filter that you mentioned, Dana, on automatic. If I don't know the number, it's going to go to voicemail. If you're having an issue with low connect rates, you can start with an email first with your phone number in the signature, and their inbox is going to recognize your phone number when they call, and it could say maybe Jason Bay. So that is going to increase at least it ringing and you potentially getting a pickup. So first thing I look at is quality of data, and I look at the personas. I want to benchmark it across other members of the team, and then I potentially pivot to an email first with the number in the signature so the phone recognizes that.
Okay, that is a huge pro tip actually, and I've heard this.
Yes.
I have not really seen it in action, but if the prospect is using a CRM like a HubSpot or a Salesforce where it's hooked up to their email, there's a lot of different ways that could be. if you send an email and your phone number is in your email signature and they receive it, it'll pop up oftentimes with your name,
Wow.
which there's a lot of other hacks that you can do too with like cell phone providers to get your name to pop up too, which is really interesting.
Mhm.
But the pickup rate definitely increases.
Mhm.
Cool. One more time, Jerry, could you quickly share your screen again? I wanted to just quickly write down the benchmark percentages so
Yep,
that people have it.
yep,
Okay.
right down on this bubble.
Yeah, so we got 5.84% for connects. So 28.2% conversion rate. That's the number of connects that last longer than 2 minutes. The phone
Correct.
call lasts longer than 2 minutes.
Yep, and these are all for the intended prospects. So this doesn't include any gatekeeper data. It's always with that ICP.
Got it. There's the benchmarks for everyone there in the chat. Uh, Ariely, I'd like to direct it over to you. So you have some stuff that through ZoomInfo's Chorus AI that you're looking at and benchmarks around like how long calls last, that sort of stuff. And I think it's
Yeah.
really good feedback for any managers or anyone doing call coaching watching this, or any reps too, to just kind of self-diagnose where you're having issues. What are some of the things that you look at in the reps that you're working with?
Yeah, that's a really great question. One thing I really focus on is how long is that call length? The longer the call, typically the better qualified we're qualifying our prospects or, potential customers. But I also look at filler words, kind of next steps to do on the call. I also look for talk to listen ratio. Are we talking too much? Are we product dumping instead of asking the customer questions or prospect like, is this a solution that you use? Like if you had a magic wand to fix anything in your system, like what would it be? So those are benchmarks I really look at. I think as managers, we put time on our calendars to call coach, right? Like to be honest, we get busy, we get bombarded with things, but I do believe that there is value in call coaching and actually spending time doing that every single day, because how are we going to know what objections our reps are running into if we don't hear them live during call coaching? And I think it better prepares us as managers to know what benchmarks we need to look for and see like out of the 50 dials or 60 dials our reps are making a day, how many of those are actually connecting and what does that connect rate look like for them to actually book a meeting as well. So I do a lot of that through Chorus.
Okay, so just to give people some guidelines, again, if there's a manager watching this, or if you're a rep and you're working with your manager to get coaching, like how many calls do you listen to on a typical day? Like how many are you giving feedback to? Like what could a rep on your team expect to get in terms of feedback on a
Yeah.
daily or weekly basis?
I do one call for each of my reps. So right now I have a team of about 8. So I'll listen to 8 calls, but then I also listen to some of the AE calls that they book those meetings for to see like, are the AEs going into those meetings prepared with the information that my SDR has provided as well? So I would say it can vary anywhere, from 8 to 10, depending on the day. If my team is having a little bit of a slower day or saying that they're running into more objections, I'll listen to more calls that day. But then we also do a weekly kind of like a think tank where we bring those calls live in front of the team, randomly pick some calls and talk to the team like, hey, what went well, what didn't go well, and what would you have changed about the call for the person who actually made the call?
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to drop a question into the chat. How many cold calls do you get coaching on from your manager every week? Let me know in the chat.
Oh,
Oh, this is a bummer.
yeah.
Yeah, a lot of zeros. Okay. What could, Airly, I'll point this question your way again. For a rep that maybe doesn't have a manager that's as proactive as you are, and I know the culture at ZoomInfo, and I'm assuming Jerry at Revenue, there's probably a ton of this in that you guys are an SDR shop. But Airly, if someone is watching this and they're a rep and they don't have a proactive manager giving them feedback on a daily or semi-regular basis, how do you suggest that they maybe talk to their manager or make it easy for them to give feedback if it's
Yeah.
not done proactively?
I would make like a Google Doc and just be like, my own playlist of calls that you want call coached. I would send those to your manager and then on your one-on-ones be like, hey, I would really want to spend some time today diving over this call. This call did not go really well and I want your feedback on it. That way it's right in front of your manager, like, let's take care of this right now. I need some coaching on this. Take that initiative. It's going to get you places specifically, but also slacking them to your manager too. If you see that your manager is kind of busy, you don't have a one-on-one with them that day, but this is a call you want coach, send it to them. Let them know, hey, I really need some help on this. I need some guidance. It's going to help me be better.
Yeah. I think that part of being a good person that is getting on the receiving end of coaching is making it easy for someone to coach you. So like you said,
Yes.
pulling up a spreadsheet, hand picking the calls, saying, hey, this didn't go well for this specific reason. If you want to take a step further, you could also like, hey, at 1 minute and 28 seconds into the call, I got this objection and didn't know how to deal with it. And, that sort
Mhm.
of thing I think is really powerful. Anything, Dana, as you're thinking about like, how do I get the best coaching from my manager? Is there anything that you do on a daily or weekly basis to like make it easy for Airly to like coach and provide feedback outside of the proactive stuff that she's already doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So during our one-on-ones, Airly actually has like a OneNote that she has us fill out with our weekly performances, and a section in there is our call coaching. And for myself, of course, I shared with Airly great calls, because who doesn't want to share their great calls? But when I moved over to a new team and ZoomInfo acquired Comparably, I was not very familiar with Comparably, super shaky on it, didn't feel confident. But as we all know, we kind of got to just dive into it and just, we fall. It's the only way we're going to learn. So there was one that I can remember that I sent over to Airly, and I told her prior, like, just a forewarning, this might make you cringe a little bit. And it was the best way to learn, but I think it's super beneficial that she does that, and she then takes it, goes like, listens to the call, and then gives you all the feedback, whether you want to hear it or not. But I think as a rep, you just have to be open-minded. You truly do, in order to grow. And I think that's when you have a manager that gives you that feedback, whether it's great or bad, what you want to hear is really how you're going to grow and just get better with things that you're not familiar with.
I think one thing that stuck out to me as well is that I know this might sound obvious to some of the people watching this, but the amount of effort that goes into the preparation for the one-on-one makes
Hmm.
for a really good one-on-one. And it's just a thing that requires a lot of discipline. So
Yes,
picking out recordings prior, sending them over beforehand, attempting to give yourself a little bit of feedback beforehand. That as a manager, listening to one of those calls before the meeting and coming in with feedback, it's a way that you can take a 30-minute meeting and get like hours worth of value out of it
for
through that
sure.
preparation. So I think bringing those calls to the one-on-one is great advice. Share them in advance. And if you're a rep, part of being a great rep too is managing up. If your manager doesn't have this system, like offer this up as a as a way to start doing like for you to get more out of your one-on-one. Okay, I want to shift gears a bit and let's just start talking and digging into some of the objections. I think people are probably kind of chomping at the bit to to hear that. So, uh, Jerry, in our prep call for this, you talked about the different types of objections, and I think that's a really good place to start because it might be overwhelming, as you saw in the chat, where there's dozens of different types, seemingly different types of objections, but really we can narrow them down into a couple categories. So, what are those categories?
Yeah, so we like to think of them, there's typically three types of objections that we could see on an outbound call. First can be a blocking objection, and those are typically after, the first 20 seconds of the call. You might hear, I don't have time, I'm not interested, I already have a solution, I'm not the right person, I don't have budget. That's the first thing they say. And that's a blocking objection. It's blocking you from even getting into a conversation with that prospect. The second type is qualifying. And that's more, a real objection, not just a blocker. It's more specific information pertaining to your offering, but you do want to overcome that to create action. And then there could be a closing objection. You get through your conversation, you're at the end, you're asking for a call to action, a time, a demo, and then there's another objection. So there's three different buckets of objections, and each, we like to use a framework of embrace, inform, and open-ended question. So embracing is really just acknowledging it, not just jumping in and trying to overcome it. Embracing it. Oh, I understand I called you out of the blue. You're embracing it. And then you can do an inform. It could be product specific or relevant specific. Hey, I saw on a webinar you mentioned this, and then an open-ended question. You never just want to say a line and just wait, because they're going to have control to own that conversation a little bit more. Go to an open-ended question and get the conversation more on your side. So those are the 3 buckets and the methodology of how we go into it. I know that's high level, but we can break it down, I'm sure, as a group.
Yeah, so embrace, inform, and then end with an open-ended question. And I know Chorus AI has a ton of data on like the amount of questions that people ask in cold calls and how they respond to an objection. And I don't remember the specific stat, but what they found in top performers is they respond to objections like way more often with a question than with a closed-ended statement. So let's start going through the framework. And I dropped in the chat also because people were asking about, hey, if we don't record calls, what can we do? That kind of thing. I recommend a couple things. You could just open up a Zoom meeting with someone and just ride shotgun and listen to them. And there's also a platform called Nooks. So Nooks is really cool. It's like a virtual call center. So you can have like people in like different like virtual pods, and you can be listening. And then when someone connects, you can go hop in their pod and listen to them live too, which is pretty cool. So those are the 2 things that I would check out. So again, that framework is embrace, inform, open-ended question. And what we're about to do is dig through blocking objections. So these are like the not interested, I don't have time, etc. The qualifying objections that are specific to your offering. We have a solution in place. We don't have the budget for something like this. And then closing objections, stuff that you run into when you're kind of towards the finish line. So Dana, I'll start with you.
Absolutely.
You already kind of gave us your response to when someone is like, yeah, why'd you call me so much? Let's go down the list here. So what if someone says, I'm actually heading into a meeting?
I straight up say to them like, hey, I appreciate that. I just want to see if it's worth me even giving you a call back. I'm reaching out from ZoomInfo. I'm actually a part of your account management team. This is why I was reaching out. I like to try and just at least get to see if it's worth me giving the call back. They're like, yeah, give me a call tomorrow. The next thing you know, I'm chasing them for the next month because I don't give up. So I just straight ask them right when I have them on the phone, like, hey, let's see if it's even worth me giving you a call back. This is why I'm giving you a call, X, Y, and Z. And they'll tell me straight from that point whether to give them a call or not. Or sometimes I get them the book. Because are they really walking in that meeting?
Yeah.
At 1:36, I think you're late.
Or they're right in the middle of a meeting. I'm like, it must have been a pretty boring meeting.
Yes, I love those. Like, hey, I'm in a meeting.
Yeah.
Then why'd you answer?
Yeah. So that was the framework in action. You embraced, right, that they were in a meeting. You informed them the reason for my call. And then the reason for the call is, can you give us an example of what something might sound like? Are you dropping in some sort of trigger that you found, or mentioning their job title? What's the reason typically?
Yeah. So being that I'm on the Town OS team here at ZoomInfo, I'm focused solely on Town OS. So I'm reaching out to town acquisition managers, chief town officers, anything on the HR side of things. So when I am going to call somebody, I'm researching to see if they're hiring. So typically I'll be reaching out saying like, I noticed that you have 46 open positions. I wanted to chat with you about that. I'm calling from your account management team. Just kind of go in that way. Typically it's when they're hiring and I bring up that point.
So you want to bring a relevant trigger into the conversation. So the informed piece for you is very specific, which I think is really important to point out because I don't know, let me know what you guys think. The psychology I always like to think about of the prospect. And when someone says, I'm about to head into a meeting or not interested or whatever it might be, oftentimes they don't even know who you are or why you're calling. They just know that it's a cold call and they're objecting to being interrupted by someone that they didn't ask to call them. So when you can bring something relevant immediately into the conversation, it's like, oh yeah, we are hiring. What's up? What do you want? Kind of thing. And then you got the open-ended question. Before we move on to the next objection, Jerry, Airly, anything about this objection that you would add to what Dana just shared? how to
Yeah,
think about it, how to respond, that kind of thing.
I really love the way that Dana goes about objections because she's so relentless. But one thing I used to say as an SDR is like, hey, instead of me giving you a call back to book a meeting, like let me tell you why I'm calling.
Mhm.
Does this sound like interesting to you? And then kind of go into your soft pitch, and they'd be like, yeah, I don't want you to call me. You've already called me 15 times. So like, let's chat and see if this is relevant. And then that way you're not wasting your time calling people that aren't interested, and you can focus on other things and other prospects and other customers that you can call. So I think people really appreciate that too, where it's like less calls is better. So like, this is why I'm calling, and instead of calling you back, like, let's talk about this and see if it's worth your time.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have too much to add. Those are really great ways to overcome that objection. If someone's running in a meeting, you can try and ask for those 20 seconds, see if it's worthwhile for me to even give you a call back. That's, you just need them to know why you're calling, because it is a blocking objection, and the chances that are actually going into a meeting are probably slim. They're trying to get you off the phone. They're trying to diffuse the situation. They're in a defensive mode. So if you embrace it, you can kind of calm them down a little bit and, see, because they don't know what they're avoiding yet. They got to hear out you is your goal.
Yeah.
If there's
I think
value,
I appreciate it as well.
yeah. And if there's value, they will make time. If there's value in what
100%.
you're saying, they will make the time. They will be 2 minutes late to that meeting to talk to you about this and see if the solution fits.
Love it. Okay, one more question for you, Dana, before we move to the next objection is mindset around this. When you get objections, it doesn't seem to like throw you off. And I'm curious if there's any intention. And where I'm kind of going with this is I was working with a rep yesterday on his cold calls. He calls security people, which they get a lot of cold calls and they kind of hate getting cold calls. So people are really irritated when they pick up the
Right.
phone. So he goes to this place. He's like, literally, what goes on in my head is like, oh shit, why did I call this person? That's where his head goes. And I'm
Yeah.
curious for you, is there anything from a mindset standpoint that when you hear that someone's like, I'm heading into a meeting, and it's a total excuse and they don't sound super excited to talk to you, what do you think? Like, what goes on in your head, if anything? And is there any intention around the mindset or the approach so that you come off in a way like how you come off, where it's like very disarming?
Yeah. Um, I mean, I don't think much crosses my mind negatively. Like I go into every call super positive. Like I could get off a call, someone not very kind, and I might need to walk away for 5 minutes, but I just come right back because every call is a new call. It's just the way that I walk into it, and I smile and dial. Like how I'm talking now is literally how I am on the phone. And I
Yeah.
always try to make the conversation like from the gate, like, hey, Jason, like I get excited, like, Jason, hi, good afternoon. And sometimes I get excited at 4 o'clock in the afternoon because somebody picked up and nobody picked up. And I straight tell them that, like, I'm excited because you're the first person I talked to, but yeah, of course you get those irritated people. And I think I just block it. I don't think I really pay much attention to it and just keep doing what I do.
I think another thing I'll drop into the chat, another pro tip is like make it hard to be rude to you.
Hmm.
Come into the call like it sounds like you are, Dan. It's like it's very hard to be like angry with a person that's excited to talk to you.
Yes.
It's like smacking away an excited puppy. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Okay, let's keep moving. So Jerry, I'll throw this one your way. Um, Not interested. And let's say that this happens pretty early in the call where it's like, hey, this is Jason with Outbound Squad. Oh, not interested. Because I think it differs a little bit if you get it a little later, but what's the thinking behind this one?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few ways to go about that. Some people like to be straight on and be like, what are you not interested in? I haven't told you the reason why I'm calling yet. It's like some
Yeah.
people are pretty bullish with that, and that's fine. I always like to understand more the why behind not interested in specifically. It's like, hey, Jason, I get I'm calling you out of the blue while I have you here. Is that because you're not involved or you already have a solution in place? It's like, let me understand that. And you'll probably get like, oh no, I am the guy. It's like, just we already have something in place. And then you can go into the conversation a little bit more. So it's like, I'd like to diffuse it a little bit. Some people can be bullish. It kind of has to be on your personality, your tone, your pace, who you
Mhm.
are. Just because it works for me, it might not work with somebody else who has a different tone or pace. So I've seen both of those work, but what works for me is just, is that because you're not the right person or because you already have a solution? And you'll hear, more about that person, because a lot of the times they almost not take offense to it, but it's like, oh, no, I am the right person to evaluate this. And it's like, hey,
Yeah.
that's why I was giving you specifically a call. And then you can go back to the conversation.
There's
I
something
appreciate
about,
that, Jerry. I like that approach.
yeah,
It's good for emails.
totally. There's something about, there's something, I don't know what the psychology is behind this, but people love to correct other people.
Mhm.
So when it's like, oh, it's because you're not involved, if it is something they're involved in, my natural instinct at that point is going to be to tell you that, no, this is my responsibility, actually.
Mhm.
Or yeah, we do have something in place. And now we're like having a conversation now
Yeah.
about something real. Um, Dana, Airly, what would you two add? What's your approach?
You want me to go first or you want to go?
Go for it, Dana. I'll let you take this one for now.
Like I said, Jerry, thank you. I really like that approach. I actually have done well, Jason, what are you not interested in? I actually didn't even tell you why I was calling. And it's worked in my favor. It's also gotten the phone hung up on me, which is fine. Then, just keep it moving. I honestly try to go into a call preventing the not interested. I have a reason why I'm calling. Like I said, like, hey, I noticed that you're hiring right now for 119 positions. Like, we need to talk. We need to have a conversation because how are you filling those positions? But of course they always do come up, and I kind of just respond with a question. Like, I noticed that you're hiring for a something in marketing. It's been up for 2 months. Like, what are you doing to fill that position? And try to venture the conversation and dig a little bit deeper, almost avoiding the we're not interested. But I'm excited for your point there, Jerry, because I'm definitely going to use that, especially on emails, because I will say, honestly, it's a struggle to go back on somebody who says, I'm not interested through email. Easier on the phone, having the conversation. Usually get ghosted when you reply back on a not interested email.
Yeah.
Yeah, good point, Dana. I think when somebody says not interested in, a way to spin that too is like, oh, do you already have a solution like this in place? Like, make them think about it. Because you haven't even started your pitch yet and they're already like not interested. So it's like, oh, do you already have a solution? Oh, what are we talking about? Like, what solution are we talking about? Like, how do we get them to open up a little bit? Because then from there, if they're like, well, what kind of solution? It's like, oh, well, I was calling you about this. Like, do you already have something in place like this? And they could be like, yes or no. And if they say, yes, we do, it's like, okay, perfect. Like, if you had a magic wand to fix anything within that solution, what would it be? Hey, like, we're having this problem with this solution and this, and then you can talk about how you come in as kind of like a consultant of your product and how you can fix that problem that they're currently having, right? To become the solution. But sometimes you kind of have to trick prospects a little bit when they say that, like, act a little dumb. Ask that question. It's like, oh, do you have a solution in place? Because it seems like you already know what I'm going to talk to you about, but you don't know what I'm going to talk to you about.
I love that. You had mentioned, Dana, calling prospects, or sorry, prospects who email not interested. Do you guys ever pick up the phone and call those people?
Yeah, I've done it.
So let's talk about that, because I think the number one thing, we're talking mostly phone today, but anytime you get an objection over email, even if I get an interested, I always like to pick up the phone to see if I can catch them real quick to schedule and just like reduce friction. So if we call a prospect who said not interested through an email, is there any particular way that you guys here on the call might recommend like opening that call?
I mean, for myself, go ahead, Airly, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, you're fine, Dana. I would just give them a call back because it's like, did you even review my email? I'd be like, hey, John, like, I got your email saying that you were interested. Is there something that you didn't find of value in the original email that I sent you, or something that I can clarify? And then they could be like, Airly, I didn't even like read your email. I just like said not interested. It's like, okay, great. Like, was there something like I can add here? Like, is there something that caught your eye potentially? And then you can further elaborate into that, because I know as a manager, like, I get a lot of emails, and the majority of the time, like, depending on the length of the emails, you probably don't read them because they're so long. So it's like, okay, what is of value? What did you find valuable? What didn't you find valuable? And that way you can either progress the conversation or you can move on.
Yeah. I chuckled a bit because I love the mindset and the attitude behind it. It's like, I'm gonna go into investigation mode here, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah,
Like, there's probably
you
a reason
got to.
I'm not interested, and I wanna know what that reason is,
Yeah.
Yes.
you know? And it's having a little bit of fun with it. Um, let's keep moving. Let's do okay. I think this is a pretty common one. Jerry, I'll kick this one. I think we asked Jerry last time, actually. Airly, I'll kick this one over your way first. Um, can you send me some more information, or can you send me an email? How do you think about that one?
I always try to get the meeting booked. I would be, I would be like, hey, Jason, like, I know that you want an email, but the best way that we can get you in front of the right people who can answer those questions live is going to be one of our product specialists. So how about we find 15 minutes today, tomorrow to dive in? And if this isn't a value, like we can go our own ways, but I think having those live 15 minutes is going to be beneficial. So we can talk about the product and answer your questions. We can also record the call. So if you need to send this up to any teammates or anybody, your manager, you can do that as well. And if they have questions, we can kind of have an email conversation about those two or schedule a second call.
Yeah. So is it fair to say, like, is assumptive the right word to use? I don't want to use the wrong word here. Like the
Something
thinking behind
closing.
this, is it to just be very assumptive and assume that if someone wants more information, if they genuinely want more information, that means there's interest there.
Yep.
And what's way easier to do to get the information that they need is to talk to someone that's more of an expert than you are.
Yes.
It would actually take a lot less of this person's effort. I know they got to hop onto a call, but it's the quickest way for them to get the information. Is the word assumptive and just kind of, I was taught to assume the sale a long time ago is what we talked
Assumptive
about. Is that
closing.
the
Yeah.
thinking behind it?
Yeah, definitely. Because if there's interest and there's value there, then they will more likely join that call and be like, okay, like, yeah, this person can actually answer my questions, especially when they get really technical about like CRM and how the integrations work. Like we have those product specialists. Because then they start asking you questions during the call, right? And you're like, oh, I actually don't have the answer to that, or you do, but you just want to get them on the demo.
Yeah.
So how do we get you in front of that product specialist?
Yeah. It's I think a big part of cold calling, just like every other part of sales too, is just not being afraid to ask.
Mm-hmm.
Just
Yeah.
ask for the meeting. And if you do that 2, 3 times, it's the second and third time usually where you're going to get a lot of movement on meetings. And it's the people that are too afraid to ask that last
Mm-hmm.
time, typically. I have some ideas on this one, but I'll save it. Dina and Jerry, anything that you would add to this? Prospect says, yeah, go ahead, send me your pamphlet, your digital pamphlet, or send me an email, whatever
Yeah.
it might be.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of ways to handle this one, and it depends on when you get it in the call. If you get it early on, in the first 30 seconds or so, it's like, yeah, I can send you over some information, but to be respectful of your time, I want to send you information that's relevant to you. Do you mind if I ask quick questions to see what I can send over? And then, typically they'll be like, yep. And now you're back in the conversation. And now you have the chance to expose a pain or a need again. You're not getting them off the hook that easy by just sending an email. It's like, oh, let me make sure I send the right content over. Can I ask? Boom. And now you're back in. If you get it at the end, there's a few ways to send it after the 2-minute mark. I can do that. I have a bunch of white papers, case studies. I can send it over, but I'd love to hear your feedback on it with my colleague and answer any more questions you have. We have availability next Thursday at this date and time. How does that look on your end? Have the date and time ready to go.
Mhm.
Be very persistent with that. You can send information. A lot of times, if you just send it and get off the phone, you're never going to hear from that person again. Something, if it's not fully qualified either, a little tip that I used to do as an SDR, because, we have a lot of different clients. A lot of them range in qualification details. Some will take any meeting. Some want some pretty serious bank qualification. So, my project needed to be pretty qualified. It's like, yeah, I'd love to send you some information. When's a good time for me to follow up on that? Morning or afternoon. Cool. I'm going to put 5 minutes on your calendar with no meeting invite, but that's going to be notifying you that I'm going to be giving you a call then to follow up on this, and I can get some feedback on the information. You might need some more clarification or qualification as an SDR, depending on the organization you're with. And that got me a lot of meetings. They'd hit accept on it. I'd follow up via email before, hey, does it make sense to extend this to 20 minutes? Sure. Well,
Beautiful.
It's a little bit of a different tip, but the 5-minute placeholders were just all over my calendar for the week. And it's like, those are
I love it.
as an SDR.
I like that, Jerry. That's a really great approach.
It is. Like it a lot.
I like the light discovery, part, like digging in a little bit more is my go-to, where it's like if I was talking to a VP of sales, I'd be like, hey, yeah, totally happy to send you an email. I am curious though, if you're like some of the other VPs of sales I'm working with and they're trying to get their AEs to do more self-sourcing and just pick up the phone, make more calls, self-source more pipe, how does that compare to what you're thinking about right now at ABC Work? And you get them talking about like, yeah, it's definitely something we're working on. Well, what kind of challenges are you having? And people will share a little bit. And then it's like, hey, how about we actually schedule a time to talk about this? Because this is something that we can definitely help with, just like we've helped ABC customers with. So I like that approach too, doing a little bit of discovery, connecting it back. Or the other approach is just like, okay, cool. Yeah, I could do that. But what's better is for us to schedule some time to meet with my product specialist. So let's go ahead and do that,
Yep.
and just be very persistent about it. Um, okay, cool. We got about 15 minutes left. So I want to transition here to the next type of objection. So we covered blocking objections. These are essentially the brush offs. The person is objecting essentially to being cold called. So we have some clever ways to handle those. The qualifying ones, I feel like, is where it gets a little tougher. So Dana, we'll start with you again on this one. We have a solution in place, or we're using a competing solution, or we built something in-house, whatever it might be. Like
Right.
we have a solution. How do you handle this one?
First question that comes to mind, especially like with a competitor or, manually is like in-house is one of my favorite to overcome because I bring up like the amount of work that comes with, and I'm always like surprised, like, oh, wow. And you're managing all of that, bring a lot of surprise to it where it like makes them think like, wow, maybe I can make my job a little bit easier. But I will straight ask them like, when is the last time that you evaluated these processes to see what else is out there? And then how they answer, they might have just looked at it 2 months ago. Okay. And then you got to move on and pivot somewhere else. But if it's been like 6 months, a year, oh, wow. Okay. Bring surprise to it where it gets them thinking. I think tone is huge when you're overcoming objections.
Yeah, I'm just writing that down. Surprise. Oh, wow. Tell me a little bit more
Yeah.
about it. And bringing in some genuine curiosity. When's the last time you looked into something else? Or you're doing all of that? I can't imagine how much time
I
that takes.
always say this because I have 3 girls at home and I always use it. And I say, wow, you manage all of that. Like and all these employees, like I have 3 girls at home and I struggle to keep up with them. Like bringing in like, wow, that's a lot. Like you wear a lot of hats and really like humanizing with them.
Jerry, Airly, what about you two?
I
Anything you
love
do
this
different?
objection. This is probably one of my favorites, especially working at ZoomInfo, because we can be like, hey, a lot of companies are focused on tech stack consolidation. And right now, your company is already using our sales platform. Have you looked into some of our other offerings that we have? Because we can kind of match that price and like have a really good price point for you since you're already a ZoomInfo customer. Is this something that you would be interested in looking into? I think that the biggest focus right now in this economy is like budgeting. And if you know that they're using a competitor, sometimes those competitors can be more expensive than your actual product. And I would say something like, hey, we actually had a lot of clients switch over from, let's say, like LinkedIn Sales Navigator to Talent OS just because of the price point. Like, when's the last time you assessed your budget for some of your tools? So I really like that because it kind of goes back to Dana's point of like, when's the last time you looked at a different product? Because I think that people get really comfortable with what they have and don't look at anything else because they don't want to go through like the integration process or whatever else that happens.
Fear of change.
Yeah, change too. So I love that objection. Very passionate about that one.
Yeah, I think one thing just to point out that you did there, just for everyone else, is customer voice. I know you guys talk about a lot at ZoomInfo. So, hey, we have some other customers or some other folks like you that are looking for ways to do this. And it was specific around LinkedIn Sales Navigator. I think like bringing that kind of stuff in, and then was also just acknowledging the like macroeconomic environment right now that most companies are looking for ways to, you know, save money on their tech stack. Like just being really
Yeah.
candid, about that can be really big. Jerry, what about you?
Those are fantastic ways to overcome that objection. I always would be like, hey, Jay, I'd be surprised if you didn't have a solution in place, or, and
Yeah.
then you can go into a few different ways. You could be like, tell me a little about what your current, solution is, or, how is that going for you? You can get like you might get a sigh right there. And then you could be like, okay, I know I can get this. You can just own it and be like, hey, be surprised if you didn't have anything in place. How familiar are you with blank? And then you'll hear, especially if, your ZoomInfo has a great brand recognition. So most people, a lot of people you talk to, I'm sure, like, I know what it is. For us, we do work with a lot of startups who are building their SDR org from the ground up. So if your brand doesn't have a lot of brand awareness, you can be, how familiar with this? They're going to say, I've never heard of it. Let me give you a little bit of background on why I'm calling and who we are. And now you can at least, you have the floor for 20 seconds to tell them why you're calling. Because pretty much everybody's going to have some type of solution in place for something you're calling for. For us, we have SDR services. A lot of people we call have internal SDRs, and they might augment with Revenir, but there's a lot of, you call a VP of sales talking about their SDR org, they're pretty defensive. They don't want to look at something like a Revenir. So there's ways to diffuse. It's like, hey, most of our teams here do have internal SDR teams and use us to augment a different market, different product, different messaging, phone first, different things like that. So, you want to diffuse the situation because you might be talking to the person who chose that solution as well. And, you're going to get some rigid people there where it's like, hey, I don't want to rip and replace the solution I had my org invest all this money in. So you really need to diffuse it. If you're going, head to head with them and, trying to be offensive, you're not going to win that battle because you might be talking to the person who chose that vendor.
The magic wand question is probably a really good one here.
I
I love that question. It's, if you had a magic wand to fix anything in your solution that you're using now, what would it be? And this is them addressing pain points. Pain points is where we can really leverage our solution, our product knowledge to the best of our abilities, because then that gives us a little bit of ammunition to be like, okay, this person does not like this about this product. How is our product different? And how can we have a conversation around that? Because coming in as a consultant rather than product dumping is going to be a little bit better. And you're going to likely have somebody that's going to listen to you because people love to talk about their problems. Let's be honest, people love to talk about the things that aren't going well sometimes. And if we can capitalize on that, I think the better off we're going to be having those conversations, because it's going to be more of an actual conversation instead of like, well, this is why we're better. And this is why you need to use our product.
The magic wand question is just a fun question also.
I love it.
Wave a magic
It's
wand.
so
It's just
fun.
like you're
Like,
not
let's
expecting to hear
pretend
that.
for a minute because
Yeah.
we're adults and we don't get to do that. So
Yeah. So I want to, Jerry, what you said earlier too, there's a couple things I want to make sure everyone kind of took from that as well. And you said diffuse, which I think is super important, where you're thinking about objections they might already have. And you're also thinking about this prospect as a human being that might have been the person in charge of bringing the solution in. So how do we do this in a way that's not going to offend the person that we're talking about and then also prevent objections? I got one more for you because I feel like this is the most common objection. I love pros and cons. So if you know there's a specific solution that you go up against that you can either complement and add on to or rip and replace, you kind of need to know what that battle card is going into it. So I'll give you a really practical example. I work with a customer right now. Their number one competitor is survey software. So think about when you go to Target and you buy something and it asks you to take a survey, or there's a thing on the website where you can leave feedback. That's what their competitor does. What they do that's not just surveys is they capture all of the feedback through customer calls into the contact center, through text, through emails. They gather all of that stuff because that's the real data. So the way that they handle this objection when someone says we're using your competitor is, hey, that's great. We have a lot of customers using ABC competitor. I'm really curious though. One of the things they hear, we hear that they really like is they're getting all of this great survey data that they weren't getting from customers before, and they're able to use that to improve the experience. But one of the things they find that they're not getting is actual customer conversations. So think about all of the people that don't fill out those surveys. What do they say in the phone calls, the texts, the emails? And I'm really curious, how are you gathering data from real customer conversations right now to improve the customer experience?
right.
So you can do pros, cons, and you have to do the pros part. This is kind of a way to talk shit about the competitor without talking shit about them.
Doing it nicely. Like, this
Yeah,
is
yeah.
great, but what about this?
I'd like to suggest things. If I suggest, because
Mhm.
I think something that you might run across, depending on what kind of software you're selling, is the customer might not know that your solution does something in a unique way compared to what they're doing right now. So asking them those questions can be really helpful. Okay, let's keep moving. That was a really, really good one. So we got lots of stuff for you guys to try there. What about, and Jerry, I'll kick this one your way, budget. So we don't have the budget. Anything that's related to budget, or we're in a budget freeze, we're not hiring right now, like what kind of stuff there?
Yeah, I mean, you can get budget early on, and it really is a blocker. Budget might not be, a lot of these companies might not allocate budget for the project you'd potentially be calling, but you, as an SDR, you really just want to talk to them about information about your product or service. Hey, completely get that. I'm not asking you to pull out your checkbook today. I'm really just calling to have a conversation to see if we'd be a fit down the line. Like, you don't want them to be like, hey, invest $100,000 in my product from this 30-second out of the blue call. You need to qualify it, you need to build a relationship, and you do need to acknowledge, it's like, hey, completely understand, my job is just to, call, into different accounts like yourself who fit into our ICP. I'm not asking you to pull out your checkbook. How familiar are you with ZoomInfo? And you want to kind of move past that budget in a cold call. The more you focus on, but it's not the time to budget. We need to see if we're a good fit first, and if there
Right.
is a problem we can solve before we even talk about budget. So it's like you can really dive into it. It's, if you hear we don't have budget, that's completely understandable. I didn't expect you to have budget out of the blue like this. Reaching out to companies in your space to let them know about us. May I ask, get to your open-ended question. Get to that question and get the
Mhm.
conversation back on yours.
Love it.
Yeah, I would say that's the best way, especially that line like, hey, I didn't expect you to bring your checkbook to the conversation. Let's get this information out in front of you. So when it is time to make those decisions or a budget does come about, like you already have all the information that you need. And then you can just reach back out to us when that time comes, if there is a time. Because I think the biggest thing we need them to know is like, hey, we're not having you bring your money. We don't expect this to close tomorrow, because it is obvious that sales cycles are taking a little bit longer now, especially with the economy. But if we can have people that have the information in front of them, ask the questions that they need, like if it's a good fit and it's going to help them, like there will be a way that they find budget. We've seen it time and time again. Or they come back in 4 or 5 months and say, hey, like we're ready to continue the conversation.
Right. That's one thing I always bring up, and I try to make it about them, like, let's see if we are a good fit for you, kind of make it about them and evaluate. Let's get the information in front of you. And even if you fold it up and put in your back pocket for when it makes sense, like that's the goal here. I love using that line. Use it all the time.
I'm curious, if we use ZoomInfo as an example, if a prospect decides to take a meeting, and let's say they're not in like buying mode, what value do they get from that meeting outside of getting a demo of like the product? Like what insight or value do they get from the account executive? What do they learn?
Yeah, I think a lot of it in that conversation is going to be, how does it integrate with our system, and how is it going to work for us and our reps today? That is the biggest part, because yes, you can get all this information, but they need to know how it's going to work in their day-to-day and how the system is going to flow if they were to implement this product tomorrow. But also, when you're in a research phase, the first people that might take that conversation aren't going to necessarily be the people that are signing the check. So those people that take the meeting can then bring that information up to their higher ups. And then we can kind of extend the conversation from there. And that's where we know, hey, let's pause this for now. Let's touch base in like 3 months. And then from there, you can say, hey, like what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a placeholder for us in, 3 months. So I can give you a call back. I'm going to check in with you the week of that meeting to see if like this is still going to be a project that you're working on, or if we should touch back later. I think that there's also value in that, because I also think that the first people you meet with aren't necessarily going to be the ones signing that DocuSign sometimes. And they're kind of the front line to see, hey, is this going to be a good fit or not for the company?
Yeah.
The guy, Ian Koniak, I recommend everyone follows here on LinkedIn. He always says, don't take a no from someone that can't give you a yes.
Yes.
If you're
I love
calling
that
someone
line.
that doesn't actually sign off on the thing, like who are they to say that they don't have budget? They don't
Right.
even know what the budget is. They just know
Yeah.
that the
You're not
budget's
even signing it.
You know, I think another thing too is like think about your value prop.
Yep.
If cost savings is one of your value props, that's a perfect reason to meet with someone that doesn't have budget.
Mhm.
Yep.
Oh,
Yeah.
hey, great. Yeah, we're hearing that from a lot of customers right now. One of the things that we're sharing is how they're reducing costs to serve in their contact centers, and specifically how they're taking customer conversations and gathering that intel to reduce friction in the customer journey to actually save their contact center a ton of money. That's what I'd like to talk to you about in our next call. So if you can tie it back, that's really, really good too. It's Ian Koniak. I'll drop it into the chat. He was the top rep at Salesforce for a couple years in a row. We got 2 minutes left here. Real quick, rapid fire. When a prospect says yes to a meeting, what do you guys do to make sure that they show up to that meeting? So I'm looking to get kind of tactical here. Do you send the calendar invite on the call and get them to accept it? Like, what are some of the stuff, if you guys were to rattle off, what do you do to make sure the prospect actually shows up?
Let's go, Dana. You have like an 85% good fit show rate. Talk about it.
Yeah. My biggest goal and what I really focused on is trying to get them to meet that day or the following day, as close to the day that you are in as possible to keep it in the front of mind. You're booking 2 weeks out, your rate, the percentage of them showing up really drops unless there's a lot of value within the conversation. Biggest focus for me is that same day or the next day. And if it's not, and if it's 2 weeks out prior, I always tell them, and I set a task for myself, like, hey, I'm going to call you a few days prior because it is 2 weeks from now. And I call and I confirm with them. I'm not one to say, hey, I just sent it over. Can you accept it, please? It doesn't really seem to be so much of an issue for myself getting them to accept it, but I try to get it as close to the day we're in as possible.
Yeah, I
within
think
the week.
that's really great, Dana. Less than 5 days, your good fit show rate is going to have a higher chance of them showing. And like that's statistically proven as well, but also setting an agenda, because I have seen a lot of meeting invites go out with no agenda. And they're like, what is this meeting for? Why am I meeting with ZoomInfo? Like, what's going on here? So when you're sending out that meeting invite, it's like, hey, here's the agenda. Here's what we're going to cover. But if your meeting is on Monday morning, on Friday, you should be sending an email from that GCal invite saying, hey, Jason, like, I'm really looking forward to connecting with you on Monday at this day, this
Yes.
time. We're going to be reviewing Talent OS. Like, here's a data sheet on Talent OS just to prepare us for that call. You're setting the expectations of why you're meeting, but also reminding them of the meeting. I think that sometimes we can just be like, oh yeah, they accepted the meeting invite, they're going to show. You need to do that background legwork to make sure that they actually show, and setting the expectations for the call.
Yes. All of our meeting invites have an agenda, which is super helpful.
Anything quick, Jerry? We got to run here.
Only other tip would be if it's booked a few days out, the day after you booked it, send a thank you email for their time redoing the agenda, just being like, hey, we're ready to meet. Me and my team are excited for this. Just put that other stuff in there.
Love it. And get the prospect to accept the calendar invite on the call if possible. I found that to be a really big one. I dropped some stuff into the chat, you guys. Make sure to check out ZoomInfo, Revenir, connect with us on LinkedIn, and appreciate all the engagement today. And Dana, Jerry, and Airly, appreciate your time and contributing.
Thank you. It was fun.
Awesome. Thank you.
It was great.
Thank you, everyone. We'll see you.
See ya. Have a good day, guys.
All right. Later.